Hello, and welcome to episode 50 of Constructing Comics, a podcast building stories one page and one panel at a time. On this episode, we have a review of House of X 2, The Uncanny Life of Moira X, and Powers of 10 2. We are in this together now, you and I. This is your spoiler alert for House of X 2 and Power of X 2 and the issues that came before. This is Matt, and I'm joined by my co-host Noah.
Hey there, and we are definitely in this now. This series is fully kickstarted off at this point.
So, Noah, I know that you're pretty excited about these two latest issues. So, give us a little bit about your feelings, and then we'll go into a deep dive here.
Yeah, it was everything I would have hoped for, where it started answering questions rather than posing more questions about the setting. So we've, now it's answered a lot of questions about the setting. Everything is completely set up so that now we can just let the plot of all the different timelines drive itself forward.
Mm-hmm.
So it started posing like, okay, now we've done all the setups. So let's now show all the obstacles and getting in, what are the objectives of each of these characters? So it's these two issues definitely sort of kickstarted the action in the books. So we're going to start seeing more development of these characters and the world that they're inhabiting right now. It's pretty great.
Yeah. So let's do a little bit of House of X number 2. That's the Moira McTaggart issue. We see sort of her lifespans go a little bit further each time. Now, let me ask you a question before we go too far. Were you sort of taken aback by the first one when you were reading it linearly, like through the book, and it was like, I don't know if I remember this correctly, but she got on the plane and the plane crashed, and you're sort of like, hey, what's going on here? And then you flip the page and you're like, you realize this is another life cycle. Like, how did that affect your reading?
It was a gut punch. Like every time that she died or made a new decision, it was like a literal, emotional gut punch. I mean, I like the character. I don't know much about Moira McTaggart, but whatever I have read with her, I know she's a staple of the comics,
Mm-hmm.
So having this, reveal of what her place is in the larger universe is pretty amazing just off the bat. I mean, the first couple pages were a gut punch where it's sort of like, oh, she lived a normal life and then died. And you're like, wait a minute, what? And then they kick back again. You're like, holy crap. So, yeah.
It was a very weird thing to sort of have like a comic book that like started, stopped, like 3 or 4 times. And it was like, it wasn't your traditional like 1 to 20 page issue. It was like 1 to 5, 1 to 6, 1 to 7. It was a very interesting way to tell a story.
Yeah, it was. I really liked it. It reminded me of the famous Watchmen issue where Dr. Manhattan's jumping back and forth in time. It's not as out of order as that is, but it does have a sort of it uses the comics medium to play with the idea of time,
Mm-hmm.
It's the time as a flat circle, but in our case, it's time as a flat rectangle. So it's a flat comic book. And so you can view it like the higher ups, the higher powers can, like Dr. Manhattan. You just look through time. And in this issue, I guess it's Destiny is sort of the one viewing the time and space like it's a comic book, So this is a very Grant Morrison-y, Alan Moore issue, I felt. But it's very Hickman at the same time because he explains it all, He doesn't just have it all be a metaphysical explanation like Grant Morrison or Alan Moore would have.
Yeah, what was pretty interesting, it was like the first time you have the gut punch.
Yeah.
You have a couple cycles until you get to the end, and you realize, if you're holding a physical comic book in your hand, you're like, not quite at the end. There's something's going to happen here. Something's going to happen here. And
Yeah.
you're sort of like working your way through, like she would have had to like work her way through to experience these, hit all these obstacles, figure out a way to get through them. So it was almost like the same experience that she would have been having that you were having reading the comic. You knew that like you had to get through story 2 to get to story 3 to get to story 4, and you're just sort of like working your way through it, knowing that like the end of 2 is not going to be good, the end of 3 is not going to be good, but you need to go through it to learn the experiences to get to the end point where you can complete, you know, the task with figuring out all the obstacles in your way. So it was a very interesting way to do a comic book.
Yeah, I really was amazed by it, and it blew my mind as I was reading it. Not only because they did callbacks throughout the issue of repeated panels as well, and we'll get into that, but they repeated panels and page designs from previous issues of Powers and House of X, just to put it in context of Moira's storyline. So with that, do you want to dive into it?
Before we do that, let me ask you one question, because
Okay.
I read it as a physical issue, so I could hold it in my hand and know how many pages were still sort of to go. You read it digitally, right? So you didn't have that, but did you have like the timing in your head of reading so many comics where you knew how many page turns you still had to go? Like I just
No,
how the experience of a physical issue to a digital issue would have worked with this kind of storytelling.
No, this series has been a revelation as far as digital storytelling goes. I'd like to. I'm gonna double dip on this and get the trade when it comes out. Both trades, if it's separate, and if it's one trade, that would be great as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really looking forward to reading it physically, but reading it digitally, I never know what's going to happen next. It's really great to read it panel by panel and just sort of isolate it. But at the same time, as we'll see in these slides, I did take photos of actual pages, because the design in this issue, throughout the whole issue, how they work around panel design and page design to sort of elaborate more or to illustrate sort of how time works in this is pretty amazing. So we'll be appreciating this issue not only on a story standpoint, but also just on an overall design, because this isn't Silva drawing here. This is Larraz, right? I think.
Yeah, Larraz is the house of
okay.
that.
So Larraz's art, like his panel and page design, it's amazing in this. About like it really illustrates her emotional journey and everything in its design. And we'll get into that as we go through. But no, reading this book, this whole series digitally has been amazing. And I can only imagine it's probably just as amazing reading it physically too. But reading it panel by panel is great.
So one more question before we do the deep dive here. You're reading, do they have the guided view app where it's sort of like moves around to the word balloons, almost like in a cinematic feel?
Yeah, it's like Comixology. The Marvel Insider app is great. I wish I could sign up for Marvel Unlimited and then go back and just read everything. But sadly can't afford that right now. But right now, just reading these issues one by one is pretty awesome. And I've gone back recently, and like all the other digital codes that I've that I've redeemed, I've gone and read other issues like panel by panel, and it's pretty great too. But you don't get what's great about this series is that there aren't very many like double page spreads or even splash pages. Mm-hmm. So something like that is lost in a digital format, I think. Because even if you're reading it on an iPad, there's nothing like turning the page and then getting a double page spread.
Sure.
I think there's nothing like that. That's what I miss in the physical copies. But since this is a Hickman book, like you know that nothing like that's really going to happen, because that's not how he writes.
So, he's trying to cram as much as he can into the 20 to 22. Well, these are like larger size issues. So even that considered, he's trying to cram as much as he can in here.
And I think only the first two, I only think House and Powers 1 were the double size. Now I think it's more, at least it's feeling more like the standard 22 pages from here on out.
I'd have to go back and check.
These two issues. But the design of these whole books, Hickman's got a real, and we'll end it on it's interesting, the soapbox that was in Stanley's soapbox that was in issue 2 of Powers of 10, that soapbox plays into sort of how Hickman, like it seems like Hickman wrote this. It's like it's interesting that they chose that quote, because like it illustrates sort of what Hickman did with this series. All right, but so starting off House of X, page 1, House of X issue 2, page 1, starts with an apocalypse quote. If you can find it in you to survive, if you are worthy, then I will make you into something more than them, something eternal. And interesting quotes. And I've highlighted some of the text stuff in this issue because it's just as important as the illustrations in this. Mm-hmm. And the design of how it flows is amazing. So going forward, we start off with Moira McTaggart as a sickly child, most likely when her mutant powers are developing is when she's sick, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And then there's some religious symbolism in the background because this series clearly has something more to say than just about the X-Men, but about society and religion and all that stuff at large and evolution, all that things. So mm-hmm. having a loaded symbol like a cross in there, you kind of fits with the storyline and the themes. And this is one of the repeated panels that goes throughout. It talks about how normal her life is, how normal her family was. This was a gut punch right here. Like, this is the first one for me. Because I was like, oh, yeah, because you look there, she says 2 boys, Callum and Dean, and 1 girl, Abigail. And you're like, wait a minute, no, those aren't her kids' names that we know. Mm-hmm. You know, that's not Professor X's kids. And so when you see that, that's sort of the first gut punch, and you're like, oh, okay. Kind of blew my mind when I read that. Then we start off and we find out what's really going on, and that she was a mutant. You know, came into being again as a fully sentient being who had full knowledge of everything that was happening, and her parents just think she's a genius. Mm-hmm. When in actuality, she's a mutant. And then we get this flash forward of her. What we don't know right now is that this is her telling, or this is Charles seeing into her mind. Mm-hmm. In that earlier sequence that we saw in the first issue of Powers of 10. And just sort of I just sort of like this panel. I like Pepe Larraz's versus Silva's artwork because Larraz is much more textured and, has a lot more cross-hatching and screen tones and everything like that. So it's cool to see both of them tackle the same designs and the same kind of illustrations. And then having Gracia's colors on there, just to unify them all in one color scheme is pretty great as well. Yeah. This whole series is just beautiful. And then this is where this is interesting. It's an interesting issue because it bounces back from standard comic book storytelling with panels and word balloons and dialogue and narration. And then they'll all of a sudden cut into just pure narration in these pages right here. It was an interesting way to mix prose with comic work. So this is a close-up on her eyes right here. Mm-hmm. And her telling the story, and what seemed to be a gift, something of a blessing, wasn't a blessing at all. It was a curse. So this is the first moment where she realizes that she needs to take a side on the mutant sort of issues, I guess. And here's another repeated panel, one of her many lives, where nothing happened in her life. I mean nothing like it wasn't her first life. Because she discovers Charles Xavier. Then we meet Charles. He's giving a speech about mutants being out there in the world. And comes out as a mutant. But then this is the first gut punch right here.
Yeah, definitely.
So Moira jumped on the first flight she could to find to America and died when her plane crashed into the ocean. And you're like, what? And this page sort of illustrates the obstacles of the issue. It reminds me of like Edge of Tomorrow or Groundhog Day, mm-hmm. where it's sort of like dying or reliving certain things is more of an obstacle than it is like a chance to do things over. Like it becomes more of a, not just a power, but like a curse to the characters. And this is sort of where you get that. It's just sort of something grim about it.
Yeah, what you mentioned, what was the Tom Cruise movie where he had to?
Yeah.
Same day. What was the name of that movie?
Edge of Tomorrow.
Edge of Tomorrow. Yeah, this was very similar to, like, you get up to a point, you learn, you go back, and you have to get to that point, figure out the next obstacle. You might make it a little bit, and then something happens to you, and you go back. So yeah, it was very much like that.
Yeah, but in that movie though, like the obstacle is like, he's only limited if his blood gets transfused or something like that, and the alien blood gets sucked out. And this later that there's another obstacle to her learning, like reliving and learning.
Yeah,
and that's pretty interesting when we get to that. This is sort of where she decides that she wants to basically cure mutants. And we have this is the panel that's not right before, but before that other panel with the plane, before she dies that time. So this is her discovering Xavier, and then after the plane, after that reincarnation, she comes back, and this panel is repeated multiple times, and it's pretty great to see, like, the only thing that's changed is her,
Yeah.
And right here, she doesn't want anything to do with Xavier. She sees him as arrogant and full of himself, and doesn't want anything to do with his sort of mutant utopia that he wants to create. She wants to sort of give mutants a choice to be superpowered or not. So then we get this interesting bit of dialogue, and we find out that it's Destiny talking, and she sees every life that Moira is going to have and that she's going to affect, and basically tells her that she's going to kill her and she's going to be reincarnated, but if she decides to do anything else like cure mutantism, she's going to come back and kill her again, and so on and so on. And if you try to kill me, I'll foresee that, so I'm going to kill you. That's Destiny speaking. This was a brutal sequence right here.
Definitely.
I don't know about you, but like faceless characters like this, they always freak me out. Like, this is sort of a, the lack of expression, it's very elemental. It's very scary. I just sort of, I like the design here of just Destiny being something that's not friendly and not nice, and very freaky. I do love this panel though of her lifting up Moira's chin menacingly.
Yeah.
Great drama in these pages. Love the backlight right here. This nice little this nice little like highlight across these characters right here. It's pretty great colors. And then she gets Pyro to burn her slowly, which is brutal. Just brutal sequence of things.
Yeah.
But it's Destiny's way of punishing her for trying to interfere with mutant kind. And yeah, it's brutal. And I didn't show the panel where she's actually burning, but I showed this panel. I think it illustrates it beautifully. I kind of like how sort of this is sort of less is more. This is as detailed as it gets in her being burned. But so she comes back. This time she sees through Xavier, sees something that she likes, and that's sort of where their relationship that we're more used to comes into play. And she lives through all the normal like X-Men timelines. So we got this great, classic First Class X-Men. We got the Claremont Byrne X-Men. We've got the pre-Secret Wars X-Men. Hickman's X-Men.
Written by Hickman, yeah.
Yeah. Then we get, but at the end of it, all the mutants get wiped out by the Sentinels, which is something in current X-Men continuity that is sort of the fate of all mutants, is that in the end they always go extinct when the machines take over. What's cool about this sequence of pages is that as she gets more involved with the X-Men, so all the previous pages have been pretty like straight horizontal panel pages, wide shots throughout the page, horizontal to each other. And then as soon as it goes, you get these more extreme angles, and they get more extreme as the pages go, as she sort of descends into the world of X-Men. and becomes a key player in it. So this is another time where she's reincarnated and she goes to the of all this stuff, but in the end, it always happens the same way. Bolivar Trask invents the Sentinels, and they wipe out mutant kind.
Mm-hmm.
And then even here, the angles get even more intense when she decides that she wants to wipe out all the Trasks. And that doesn't do anything because in the end, the Sentinels just are inevitable. Like, an artificial intelligence taking over and wiping out mutants are inevitable. And I love this. I love these 2 pages together. They're just great.
The sliding panels, the 2 before were, slowly sliding, and then these are sliding downward even more dramatically. But as it happens, as things reverse, these are sort of sliding upward. So it's a way to show you that, like, that one timeline was going fast to this one point, and then you got here, but all of that sort of came back and leveled out.
Yeah, man, I love this this action shot right here of her killing all the Trasks. It's just a really well composed page, and I like, I mean, from working on Life Cycle, I love doing like this, where you have one character, interlapping with all the different timelines and things like that, or different locations. It's just a great page.
With that one, you can almost see the gun sort of like from like shot, hit, shot, hit, shot, hit, shot, hit, and then even on the third one, that gun barrel is lined up right on the site of the head of that character walking in. It's a straight line there. So yeah.
It's a great design. I love, again, I just sort of love when colorists aren't afraid to use red and green complementing each other, in corners. It's great. It's just great. And then I love this page because this sort of flows into where she's going to go next. So it's going down, but now it starts to ascend, and that leads us into these vertical panels where she was horizontal before, then she started going angular, descending into the X-Men thing, but now it's from here on out with Magneto, it's vertical. And it's interesting that, like, the book basically switches formats slowly as it goes, and you get these nice perpendicular pages. Mm-hmm. And then Apocalypse comes in, you get back into these sort of angular things, and we'll get into that sequence of events. There's the inevitability of the Trasks, close up on her with the gun, great hatching, great screen tones, doing the different textures. Love that. When she goes to Magneto, you get these vertical panels. I love this octopus squid throne that he's sitting on right here. And Magneto's rage before the Avengers and X-Men wipe him out. Mm-hmm. And then there's these other vertical panels where you see Apocalypse reaching out his hand, and later in Powers of 10, this is really interesting, bringing them both back to back. We had a question at the end of Powers of 10 as to who the old man is that Logan is referring to in year 100.
Yeah, we find that out.
Yeah, but we find it out in the same way that he's introduced here, where you just see his hands first. So I knew immediately when I saw his hand in Powers of 10 number 2, I was like, oh, that's Apocalypse, because they set it up here. So I thought that was a really cool, neat way to stay consistent. And she joins up as one of the 4 horsemen, gets rid of all the Avengers and the X-Men, and tries to elevate mutant kind. But in the end, you see the first appearance of Nimrod in this universe. And so this will come into play in Powers of 10 as well, so that Xavier and Eric know about Nimrod's inevitability in the timeline, and he's an important character in the Powers series. And then I love this sort of just blank panel, just one line, Then we go back to these like exact same composition, exact same color scheme, but it's just Larraz's take on this sequence from Powers of 10 issue 1. And you get back to these horizontal panels.
Mm-hmm.
Things are back in order. Like I said, we've seen this before. I just love that they didn't repeat. They didn't copy and paste. So Silva's panels. Larraz drew them himself. It's pretty great. The same color scheme, but it's his expressions. His lines. It's great. But this time we know what he sees. It's we see it in a different context. It's great. I just love that. It just that made the whole issue for me right there.
Yeah, it's a great way to use the medium of comics to tell a story. Like, we saw this from one person's point of view the first time, and we're seeing it from the other person's point of view the second time. So it's the same story, but slightly different perspectives. So it's one of the interesting things you can do with comics here.
Yeah, and it's also, when you think about Marvel and DC, you just think of them as the sort of corporate machines of comics,
Mm-hmm.
And we know this because, even Boom Studios and Dynamite does this. If they can repeat panels without changing anything and just putting the word dots in there just to increase, the time between a deadline,
Yeah.
they'll do it. But for this, they didn't, that Larraz drew all these over again, and his style is amazing to me.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't just copy and paste Silva's. I love that. That's just good craftsmanship, and it serves the story. Like you said, it's from a different POV, so we use a different artist. It's just great. Then of course I copied all the time her whole timeline. It's spread across a couple pages, but yeah, there it is all together.
Yeah, so before we go any further, I saw somebody online saying that one of these is a circle that never finishes, and so somebody's speculating that it could be a circle, which makes sense from what we saw earlier, that always continues. But no, this is a pretty cool graphic.
Is a flat circle graphic. It's what makes Hickman is that he does this kind of world building detail.
Let me ask you a question before we go with too much further.
Yeah.
The fact that it looks like Spider-Man's logo, do you think that that's a wink or a nod to anything, or what?
Yeah, there's a Web of the Spider-Verse kind of wink or nod. Yeah.
Yeah.
That might be. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. But yeah, that was the end of House of X issue 2.
Mm-hmm.
Great issue. I think this one, again, kind of like what we talked about with Mr. Miracle, is that you can kind of take any issue of Mr. Miracle out of context and read it and appreciate it as its own thing. But then, of course, when you read it together, you appreciate it as one whole story. This is probably the only issue that you can say that. Like, this is a complete story almost within it. Like, this could have been number 1 or just a one shot. This issue was great. It had a beginning, middle, and an end, and it was well told throughout in very inventive ways. Just a good issue. I hope it gets an Eisner nomination. I hope Larraz and Hickman get an Eisner nomination. I hope Silva and Hickman get an Eisner nomination for this series. I think they will, but it's just, at least for that issue, it's pretty amazing. Now on to Powers of 10, issue 2. And we have this quote from Magneto about, "There's a chasm between you and I, Charles, a gap that cannot be crossed. With each passing day, I fear it never will be." And then we get on to the next sequence, which is them coming together.
Mm-hmm.
In this, after what we've learned in the last issue of X, we know now what Moira knows, so they have power to sort of bring Magneto in. And I think this sequence is brilliant right here.
Yeah.
You don't see Magneto's face, you just see his helmet. And, that idea of is played throughout here really well. You know, you never see Magneto's face until it's absolutely crucial to the character. So you get these great images of just this faceless Magneto, basically being reluctant until Xavier convinces him to take off his helmet. And then he shows Magneto everything that Moira has lived through. Mm-hmm. And you get all these alternate things. You get sort of, I guess these are big moments from the sort of classic continuity, aren't they?
Yeah, the one where he's in cuffs there, sort of like 2/3 of the way over from the left. Yeah. That's like X-Men 200 like cover right there. So yeah, that's okay. Clearly a nod to the past there.
Do you know what this is about right here with Nick Fury looking at him in the healing tube thing on the far right?
That one's a blank spot for me, but
okay, someone knows probably somewhere.
Yeah, it's not shocking that Nick would at some point have a talk with him.
Yeah, wasn't there a story at one point when X-Men continuity that Magneto was a clone or something like that? Everyone was a clone at some point or another.
Yeah, I was going to say Marvel. Everybody has been cloned or fought their clone or died and come back as a clone. Yeah, or have two children as a clone. Yeah, so that's a trope that's been touched a few times.
Yeah. I like this panel right here of Moira holding the helmet because it's just sort of Hickman knowing his audience, knowing the comics and knowing how important that is to a character. You know, that this sort of idea that Magneto has fully let his guard down and that Moira is sort of holding the power that he his only way of like being invulnerable to Charles, and it's Moira holding it. There's just something poetic to that. And as far as like the character's history, I just sort of like this panel in isolation. It's just a good moment of knowing your characters, knowing what's important to them, and knowing that it serves the story in that moment to show this image. And it's just a good illustration.
Yeah. So the longer the panel that you have over here to the right, I don't think it's quite the 180 rule, but they do a good job on this page where sort of it ends in a handshake.
Yeah.
Sort of like we're standoffish at the beginning. We get a little bit closer, and then we get two hands sort of. We're kind of ready to shake, and then they finish on a shake. So this is, for as dramatic as you can make a handshake and like drag it out, they do this for an entire page and they pull it off.
It's great. Yeah, I don't have this whole page on there. Again, like I've said in other episodes, if you are watching this, just go pick up the issue in whatever way you possibly can. It's pretty great.
Yeah, but like we said, they do a good job of the slowing down that beat of like, we want to shake hands. We're not really sure if we want to shake hands, and then they do at the end of this. The last panel of this page is a handshake.
Yeah, it makes it matter. You earn that handshake by the end of those panels, just by how long it takes to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we cut to current. We get to I guess this would have been X-Men Year 1. So if we're doing with the powers of 10, this was X-Men Year 1.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're back to X-Men Year 10, where we're in Krakoa. After Mystique has delivered the mysterious item to them. And looks like Cyclops is returning from his confrontation with the Fantastic Four. And we're finally learning out what Mystique, Toad, and what's his name?
Sabretooth
stole. Yeah. And we find out that it's all the information on Orcus.
Mm-hmm.
And now we know that Xavier and Magneto and all the other X-Men in Krakoa know about who they're up against and who's trying to stop them. And this is repeated later on in Year 100, but they basically come to the conclusion that they need to go and stop them. But here's also something. I highlighted that panel in House of X where Nimrod was fighting Apocalypse. So they know about Nimrod being a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And Xavier thinks that Orcus is behind Nimrod becoming operational because they find out about a mother mold that they're making on the Orcus space station that's close to the sun. So the mother mold is possibly Nimrod that will come in, take AI to their next stage of evolution and subsequently wipe out mutant kind. So Xavier, Magneto, all the other X-Men resolve that it's time to attack that base. And that's where we leave off on year 100. Great dramatic panel of Cyclops right there. A lot of great lens flares. Definitely.
J.J. Abrams would love that. That panel.
Want to see J.J. Abrams' X-Men movie now. Yeah. Then we cut to year 1000. That's our year 100. And we see Rasputin and I can't remember this guy's name or this guy's name. But basically the Nightcrawler and the Magneto guy and Wolverine. And he's talking to the big man. And they're talking about what they stole in their timeline from Nimrod and his mutant weapon soldiers. And we see this hand. And that was sort of something that was done in House of X. I just love that. That's how they introduced the character in that issue, and this consistency. They introduced him in this one, so you know it's inevitable that who's asking for the info is Apocalypse. That's a great twist right there, that now all of a sudden wasn't enough for Magneto to be the good guy in this series. Now Apocalypse is as well.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
No, it was pretty great. Because when we did the issue before and Wolverine said, "Hey, let's go talk to the old man."
Yeah.
We threw out a lot of theories, and this was not one of the people we predicted at all. So no, this was pretty great.
And I think that's because both of us are such fans of of the Apocalypse storylines, like especially Remender's like X-Force stuff,
mm-hmm.
where they sort of explore the idea that in any eventuality, Apocalypse is a dangerous character. You never want him in charge, like the Thanos, I guess, of the X-Men or the dark side. He's always bad.
Mm-hmm.
He's always bad news. But in this storyline, he's good news. So we're going to hopefully find out. Well, actually, he may not be. We don't know. But hopefully we'll find out later. We don't find out in this series. We cut to Nimrod. He has this great sort of existential moment where he talks about not being able to enjoy telling the truth and telling lies. And he basically fries these two dudes in Dr. Manhattan style.
Definitely.
We're talking back to him. So basically he just gives the rest of his monologue to himself, which is a pretty great sequence. I really love this character, and he's not shown up in any other comics before, right? He's new for this series.
So yeah, I might have a little bit of a blank spot in my X-Men knowledge. But I don't know a lot about him. I feel like maybe he showed up in the cartoon a little bit, but
okay.
I'm not exactly sure here.
Yeah, so Nimrod is a pretty cool. He's well written. He's a very well written character in this series. But another well written character. Another well written character is Zorn and the Tree Man, who we still don't know the name of. That this guy isn't the mutant body of this character isn't the same body of the brain that's in the character. This is an older mutant who could communicate with different forms of life and manipulate them, but the brain is not that original mutant's brain.
Yeah, and so
the mind, I guess.
This was the Groot figure we saw.
Yeah.
But he's sort of changed over time a little bit here, so.
Now we get to see a little bit more of his skill set. So he's accessing the information that they stole in the first issue of Powers of 10. And Zorn is being a nihilist, which is very entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this sequence about him just basically talking about how meaningless everything is. And then basically he agrees to a suicide mission and everything, and it's But it's great. So they unlock the information only to find out that it isn't the info they're looking for, but it's the location of the for. That's what they're doing. So they come to the same conclusion of the characters in year 10, that they basically need a full frontal assault on this main base to get the location, to get the information that they but Nimrod doesn't know what they're going after. He just knows that they stole a bunch of different information. So their obstacles is that when the mutant that got captured, what that mutant's powers were able to do was to hide them from the machines and the I guess like the hounds that were like, would be able to sniff them out. So they don't have that mutant anymore. So now they're going in guns a-blazing. And Zorn's all excited about it because he's suicidal and nihilistic.
Definitely.
Apparently. Yeah, I love that. And Apocalypse is going to lead the way, which is pretty epic. And more hand shots of this series has a lot of hand shots. So I don't know what the significance of that is. Maybe it's supposed to sort of be like a Sistine Chapel kind of thing. I don't know.
No, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of hand shots in this whole series. I mean, it started out with hand shots. So the focus on hands is interesting. Maybe it's about, maybe it has to do with craftsmanship, what you create with your hands, because that's sort of, I guess, the thing I guess you associate hands with, create and destroy, I guess. There's a lot of creation and destruction themes going on here, involving evolution, ascension. So maybe that's what hands are about.
I know that artists don't like to draw hands, so hopefully Hickman early on said, hey, Pepe and RB, you guys are going to be drawing a lot of hands, so get ready.
Yeah, there are a lot of hands in this series. And then we cut to 1000, and this just is where my brain was just like melted because I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. So we get this huge info dump on these infographics about after this sequence, which is just weird. You get this info dump before this sequence where it explains the Nimbus and the Nebius or something like that. All the different, basically like there was this planet. And these scientists and these artists injected their minds and their consciousness into this bomb, basically that planted itself in this planet, or this sort of like this star. Basically, created this like planet hub of knowledge, and created new forms of life that are basically like raw intelligence. And then there are different levels of these raw intelligences. So like you have machines that are at a certain level, and then there's all these other different species, and there's all about this all about this sort of combination of these intelligences that sort of like, I don't know, that like sort of you can ascend depending on how much gets combined and everything. It was basically like Philip K. Dick's role-playing game rules is what it felt like, or Arthur C. Clarke's D&D manual probably.
Yeah. So was this like the and I might have the word wrong. Is it like the Kepler systems? Yeah. And like some of that like early on stuff was like almost based in like our reality, like of like how we think of like possible alien civilizations that we could encounter. But then those early on descriptions that were close, and then we just sort of went way off the normal scale, we could have for talking about reaching other civilizations. But no, it did go wildly crazy after that.
Yeah, like this whole issue is like really where the plot became heavy, and you're like, oh wow, all these questions are being answered. Now we're just sort of getting into the action of the story, and then it comes to a screeching halt at the end of this issue, where you get all these new creatures showing up and talking about how they want to combine with the sort of mutant machine hybrids in year 1000, talking about eating your world mind, which is phalanx and world minds are different levels of intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
You got these guys coming out, the phalanx. I don't know how you pronounce that. Am I saying that right? Phalanx?
Yeah, I was saying phalanx, which is like sort of like,
Sorry. The different like shields, basically.
it's like a line of like Roman soldiers like
connecting
walking
shields.
in unison, and that
Yeah.
they're not supposed to break. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's the phalanx. This is we get these creepy celestial beings, faceless celestial beings, which is ominous.
It was very cool. It was these are very Kirby-esque sort of beings in space, sort of showing up, giving you messages, showing up, destroying you, or having the ability to show up and destroy you. So this was very cool here.
Yeah, there's definitely some Galactus, some motifs here, Galactus motifs. So we have some celestial vibes going off. And then our main, he wants ascension from these guys. So that's where we end these issues, story wise. This is where this is the quote that bookends it with because you're all the levels of the different intelligences.
Yeah.
Right here. But this is where we end it. This quote is, you must see by now there is no you and I, there is only us. We are together or we are nothing. It's basically a response to the quote that started off the issue about the why Magneto sees that they'll never be unified. Yeah.
So I have a question here.
Okay.
Do you think Hickman gets a page rate, and he gets a page rate for writing this page here, where he puts down like 12 to 16 words of a quote from somebody? That's a pretty sweet gig if he gets a page rate from this.
Yeah, it is a pretty sweet gig. I wonder if he gets, because this is all his design work. He's doing. I think he is making all these designs and putting them on the pages, so he's got to get a page rate.
Yeah, it's a good deal if you can get it.
Yeah, so he's probably getting good bucks from Marvel for this series. And this is the if I have it on here, I hope I do. Oh, maybe I don't.
What were you trying to get?
Oh, there it is. There's a fan soapbox, which is interesting, but basically he talks about on this is that, the question they get a lot is how do they come up with their ideas? And he said that the ideas aren't a problem. The problem is that, the ideas come up in 5 minutes, but, we get so many different other thoughts, and the hang up is the time to develop the ideas. And so, that's the thing that plagues all comics is sort of, especially when you come into the big two, you have there's so much else going on. There's publisher deadlines, especially if you're working on monthly books, you have to come up with stuff really fast, character development, or you need to be really prepared to look ahead, but sometimes you have to do the filler issues, because you were like, I was saving this for later on, but with this series, what's amazing is that clearly Hickman had time to think this out, to develop this on the spot. Like this is, at least that's what the vibes that I'm getting. I'm getting that this is a real passion project for him. What about you?
Yeah. So early on, there was some rumors that Hickman was going to come back to Marvel, and one of the things I really hoped was that he was going to come to the X-Men, and he did. But I also think that right now, so far through these first 4 issues, he's pretty lucky in that, like, he hasn't, or at least the way he has this set up, where we're doing these alternate timelines, we're jumping into the future. He's not encumbered by any of the current Marvel continuity. These things are I mean, we saw the Avengers show up here for a little bit and then get dealt with, but we have not had any. We haven't had any interaction from any other Marvel characters in this. So,
Yeah.
this has got to be a passion project for him, that he's had a lot of planning and he's had the ability to execute this, but he doesn't have to deal with, oh, wait, Spider-Man is not acting like he should be because he's, currently dealing with Kraven trying to go on a hunt and take him out. So he's in a really great spot where he's had time to plan and he's not having to deal with tying everything in.
Yeah, and we've been trying to figure out this whole time if this is a graphic novel of sorts. Is this something that's in continuity with the X-Men series? Is this an event book? And that Moira McTaggart book sort of threw it all on its head, that it's something completely of its own thing. It's all of those things. And it doesn't just have to be one. And that's where I think that's just sort of Hickman's genius right there. Being able to get the green light to write this story is pretty amazing. And clearly they gave him time, and him and Larraz and Silva and Gracias and Clayton Cowles, they gave them all time to develop this book so that they could be coming out weekly.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they paid them probably ahead of time because they knew they had faith that this series was going to be good. That's pretty amazing in this day and age, especially for Marvel. They're the people that are so scared of losing readers that they reboot every year,
Yeah.
To take this kind of narrative risk where they're like, yeah, we're just going to let him tell a story. It's pretty amazing.
Now, do you want to see how other Marvel Universe characters would deal with these situations? Because I've had a lot of thoughts of and I think we touched on this earlier, if I was Peter Parker and there was the ability to get a pharmaceutical that would add 5 years to somebody's life, he's got to be in Krakoa right away, being Aunt May is this amount, she's X years old, and he's like, I need this, and I want to see Magneto being oh, Spider-Man, you want some of this, this flower, you owe me a favor now. And he could play, all of these Marvel Universe characters against each other or call in favors. That would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see that. And I wouldn't be surprised if something like that didn't happen, because the first issue, that's the one thing that there are a couple of things we haven't returned back to. But that's one of the things we haven't returned back to since the first issue of House of X is what Krakoa is offering the world in exchange for coexistence and to be recognized as a sovereign nation. So that's something we haven't returned to since. We also haven't returned back to the POV of the Orcus. So we are. I wouldn't be surprised, if we're coming into it, if the raid on the space station is successful, that's going to be the next big twist. But it's going to be that sort of but we know that it's inevitable that Nimrod's going to be coming into play. And if they're successful in year 100 with taking down Nimrod, we know that there's another inevitability of him coming back and basically merging with mutant kind in year 1000. So there's they've already played with those ideas a little bit, where it's sort of we know what's inevitable, but do we? I guess, but then it's sort of not to be too cliche deep, but do we really know what's inevitable? I guess
So, do you have any concerns that we get through all of these issues, 12 issues, and we just sort of get to the 12th issue and
this was all a dream.
Somebody's mind is wiped. Somebody travels in time to go to a key point,
Yeah.
keep everything from happening. Like, I really hope that's not what happens, but that
No.
is a possibility.
The only series I've read of Hickman's that I've read it to the end is the Secret Wars sort of big sec chunk. And I haven't read all of it in there. I haven't read all the Fantastic Four and all the Avengers stuff that he wrote in that amazing event. But how he ended it with Secret Wars was really great because he undid things from Secret Wars, but he moved the universe forward in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping he does the same thing because he's capable of doing the same thing, right? I don't know how he's handled other stuff too, but like in his other graphic novels. But that seems to be the case normally, right? With his stuff.
Yeah, and we've already had some stuff announced, so we know that he's at least overseeing like the side books, and I think that he's writing the main book with Linnell Francis Yu.
Right.
So even if he does sort of reset a couple of elements, yeah, we're going to get a continuation of this. So
yeah,
that's just sort of like the mystery of 2019. The internet solicits 3 months in advance, like, and also the nature of comics. Something's going to happen next month. So even if it is reset, we have some timelines reversed, some timelines changed. We're going to get some more stories. So it should be interesting.
And that's the stupid thing about Marvel, and they do the same thing with the movies, right? Everyone knew Spider-Man was coming back because Spider-Man Far From Home was announced, and they were doing ads for that before Endgame, right?
Yeah.
Their whole other slew of TV shows and movies announced and stuff like that after Infinity War. So, we knew we were getting a Guardians Volume 3. We knew we were getting a Black Panther 2, a Captain Marvel 2, that kind of stuff. We knew we were getting another Thor film, all that jazz. And the same thing, it happens with their comics, right? So they can't leave well enough alone, right? So it's like, we can't let this series live on its own. We have to be like, oh, guess what? We have bigger plans outside of this, which I don't know. I get that when you're like, when you need to get investors on board, but as readers, we're invested, especially with comic books. They don't know, like, there's just sort of, I know, this is sort of me sort of sounding like I'm on the soapbox advocating for fan service, but I'm not. I'm just sort of like, you can service the fans and readers by not telling them that it's going to be okay. We can have some sort of suspense as to how the outcome of this book is going to be, or what this outcome is going to be.
Yeah. And one thing that's interesting is, like, I don't know how many Spider-Man comics that I've read in total, but even when I open that book and I'm reading it, I still get caught into the trap of, is he going to make it out of it? And then I get to the end of it and I'm like, that was silly. Like, why did I get caught up in all this drama? Clearly he was going to make it out in the end. So that's like that's a really interesting dynamic that a writer who's doing a monthly series probably has to battle. Like, they have to pull you in. They have to give you that element of doubt, that drama.
Yeah.
Like, is your hero going to make it? And then you do get caught up in it, and you're invested in the story. But then when you flip that last page, you just sort of like in your mind go, why did I get caught up in that? Clearly Spider-Man was going to punch Doc Ock in the end and make it out of it. Like, why on page 12 was I so concerned that he wasn't gonna make it? But
that's true.
That's the nature of monthly comics, and it's a skill that you have to develop.
Yeah, so I need to have, again, I think I made this point earlier comics. I just need to have more faith in the creators and not get too upset with the corporate previews and stuff like that, because they're just trying to get us excited, and they know we'll come back, right? They know we're going to keep coming back to these characters, so it doesn't matter what they say or what they do. We're going to read these books and we're going to love them no matter what.
Yeah, and this one has done a really so far 4 issues in, this one has done a really good. At least it seems from Joe Blow on the street reading this. This seems like
Yeah.
they've let Hickman do what he wants. There's probably part of the appeal and the courting process to bring him back, to be like, we're going to let you do what you want. These are, this is the sandbox that you have. Play with it. We're going to let you do it. So,
I wonder what his pitch was for this. I would love to know that. Maybe they'll include that in the trade. Like, what was his like elevator pitch to Marvel when he came to them with this story?
Yeah.
So, or did he have to pitch it all, or were they just like, yeah, just do whatever you want?
Yeah, that's a possibility. I don't know if you know that there was a director's cut of issue 1.
Oh, wow.
And I would like to get a copy of it. But what's pretty funny is apparently, like, a lot of the stuff like in the script is redacted.
Oh, wow.
Because I just envisioned Jonathan Hickman sort of like in his office with his sort of like beautiful mind, like putting all these pieces together, and they're in the script. They're in the script for the artist, but like when you do a director's cut, like you obviously can't be like, oh, and then issue 12, Magneto stabs Xavier in the neck, like, and then nobody's gonna. So like that's the problem with the director's cut of a series that hasn't ended yet. But I would like to track that down just to see, even if it's redacted. I would like to see, because I've never seen a Hickman script, but like I think that would be interesting. The level of detail, or the not the level of detail that he puts. I want to see that just for a craft sort of standpoint.
Yeah, I'd love to see that too. I'd love to see what his panel descriptions look like. And if he is really focusing on hands the whole time. Yeah. I'll definitely have to go actually pick up a physical copy of that. And not just mooch off of the digital codes that you give me. This is a pretty great series. I'm not been let down by it yet. I'm really excited to see where it goes, and I'm hooked on whatever comes after with Lionel Francis Yu and stuff like that as well. I'm in it for the long run at this point, just to see what Hickman does with these characters, because this is a rare one.
Yeah, I'm probably at least in for the main book, which I'm assuming is probably going to be the Uncanny. But I'll have to figure out the. I think there's a total of like 6 series coming out of this, but at least the main one that's written by Hickman, and I think he has oversight on sort of like the managing editor of like the other one, so that like they at least have to fit into his sort of like overall vision of what he wants to happen. So that's probably pretty good. So you'll at least have one cohesive sort of narrative going to one point. So
exactly. Those 2 issues were pretty phenomenal. You want to get on to our celebratory aspect of this episode?
Yeah, this is episode 50, and we haven't had a chance to discuss, but we're going to reboot, right? We're going to go to 1 next time, right? It's sort of like the Marvel move. You go so far, and then you reboot. But no, we're going to come back with 51. Sure. So I'll start us off, and I think you'll agree with me here. Some of our highlights are the people that we've had a chance to talk to.
Definitely.
Yeah, we were pretty honored to have Philip Kennedy Johnson on to talk about his process, and then pretty recently we had Philip and Jonas on to sort of talk about their process together. But why don't you talk a little bit about that? They came in to talk about how they work together.
Yeah, it was a great and wait for my internet connection to not screw up.
No, you're fine. So we were talking about how
okay.
Philip
Yeah.
and Jonas worked together and how that was very interesting. I know for me and you who worked together, it was pretty interesting to see that as well.
Yeah. And I kind of am beating myself up issue because there were clips where I was agreeing with them and I had a question and they kept talking and I was like, oh, why did I interrupt them? Like, why does it look like I'm interrupting? Because like I really would have loved just to have let them talk the whole episode, just sat back here and said, yeah, I like that. Yeah. That kind of thing the whole time. It was a dream come true to have an artist and a writer of a series that I was really familiar with on the podcast to talk about their process. And to follow up and to have a repeated interview too, I would love to have everybody that we've had on again. We've had great guests on this. Mm-hmm. I think our first interview, we had guests on, but our first interview was with David Whalen, with the creator of Offspring, which he wrote and amazing.
Yeah, that was early on.
I'd love to follow up again, see where his series is at. And then we had Greg Schoen, who took the time out of his early morning in Tokyo to talk to us about Ray Gun, which is a graphic novel that I can't find anywhere. It got snatched up really fast. And then, of course, we had Jordan on, which was amazing. Love to have him back on again to talk about what he's working on. And we had Andre and Andrew for Tokyo Rose, which was a very successful Kickstarter. And can't wait to read that book. And we had Mike Spearman, who took time out of his what time was it there in Australia when we were interviewing him? I can't remember.
Oh yeah, he was either early morning or late at night to hang out with us.
Yeah, he was so nice, so generous with his time. Then of course we had Philip, who took time out of his really busy schedule to talk with us. And then Jonas, who took time out of his, of course, overseas European time zone. Mm-hmm. We had Mark Stanislavski, who was on recently and talked about his great, his huge body of work that he's got, just self-publishes himself, which is really inspiring. And I missed out on a lot of cool interviews. You had Clay Adams on, Alex Schumacher.
Yeah.
There were a couple others I missed out on too.
So I did. Yeah, I did one with Frank Gogol of
Frank
Inns, and that book is currently blowing up. I think all the issues are sold out, and
wow.
I think the secondary market on eBay for Frank's book is pretty high. So that was cool to interview him before that book came out. So
that's great. Yeah, that was a great interview right there. It's been a great ride as far as we've had on, and the people who've taken time to talk to us. I'm really looking forward to who else we can get on. I'm looking forward to having some other people back on that we had good discussions with. It was great to have Rebecca on early on to talk about witches, just to get her perspective on things, and then have Vince on to talk about Autumn Lands. It was a fun episode. And then, of course, to have Emily on to talk about data.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get her input on all the data that Hickman presents on this series after it's done. See her analysis of it all.
Yeah, I've shown her a few of the infographs.
Yeah, it's been great, and I'm really looking forward to what we do ahead of time. Maybe the artists and writers that we get on, but if we can, if there are other people in there, like, if we can get some editors or letterers or colorists or something like that, get some people who work behind the scenes in sort of the roles that not a lot of people know about, would be great. Mm-hmm. To see who we get lined up in the future. But I think what this podcast has been about, and what's been so much fun about it, is just sort of taking the time to analyze books that we read really fast, and starting out with that hour and a half long breakdown of the director's cut of David Finch and not David Finch. Oh, yeah, David Finch and Tom King's Batman #1, and or even our Lee Weeks, the Lee Weeks issue that we broke down. Tom King and Lee Weeks, that silent issue was amazing, and G.I. Joe silent issue was a great breakdown. Yeah, that's all of this podcast is, just to talk about stuff like that and to bring on other people to talk about it as well.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of great comic podcasts, but I always wanted to have sort of a different take on, like, and as we say, like, building a story and putting it together one page and one panel at a time. And as we did with these slides, like we saw a lot of that with like what Hickman and Pepe Larraz and RB Silva are doing this. They're truly building a story each panel, and like, you'll get to a page and you'll go, oh, that panel 4 pages ago is related to this, or this story is cycling back and going back to this panel. So they're building a story and they're doing it in a different way. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's been fun to do it, not just with modern books, but to go back and see how the greats did it. I loved our Stanley episode where we looked over his old issue with Wally Wood.
Yeah, that was pretty early on, and that was great because we actually had the script on that one.
Yeah, that was a great one, just to see his Marvel method right there of crafting a page. And again, talking about that G.I. Joe silent issue as well, just to see, Larry Hama, I guess, doing his thing himself, that he crafted that masterpiece of an issue in under a week is just mind blowing still today. That he made one of the greatest, like, most well composed comics in history. Yeah, it's been it's episodes, and I'm looking forward to our next 50.
Yeah, we had a couple of Inside Baseball. We had a couple of false starts. We tried a few times. Those first 2 episodes, we recorded those, and we didn't really put them out into the world for a while. And then I think episode 3 was like when we really committed to almost a weekly schedule, and it's been a lot of fun. We've met a lot of people, hopefully helped a few people.
Loved it. Yeah, I would have loved to have been introduced these people to their work. And because these are hardworking guys doing it for the love of the artwork, which is amazing.
Yeah, and if we could circle back to like how well Frank's Deadhead Kids is doing, it's just a testament to coming on Constructing Comics. You Constructing Comics, and then your book sells out. So
exactly, yeah, that's that's an incentive to people who want to come onto our show.
All the creators out there, if you want your books to sell, you have to come on this podcast here and talk about how you build that story.
And we're pretty cool guys too. We're pretty cool to talk to. So
we built a good rapport, and you have made those recently. You've made those really in-depth, amazing slides to.
They've been so much fun to make.
So,
I've been loving doing that, and I've been and you've got great organizational skills, and we know you seem to know what topics to talk about and how to pick them out, and I think we work well together. I think we're 2 years later, we're just now figuring that out. Probably. Just kidding.
I'm happy that we've got it started. It's opened up a lot of avenues and helped out a lot of people, I think, and just sort of opened horizons to storytelling, I hope.
Yeah, I really hope so too, and I think what we've made clear with this podcast is that we just love this. We love storytelling. We love the art of storytelling, and for both of us, the way of our chosen art form of storytelling is comics. But it's I find that putting it in a box is sometimes limiting to the sort of the impact that it has on us as people who devour stories,
Yeah.
and who live our lives based around stories. There's so much more to these things that we just either don't read or we read really fast. And it's great to slow down and see how they crafted it.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people who, when you mention comic books to them, and we are guys who love our superhero comics, but like a lot of people,
Yeah.
like when you say comic books, like they instantly think Batman, Superman, Spider-Man.
Right.
And comic books is a medium of telling stories. It's not the genre of superheroes, and the genre of
No.
superheroes is an amazing way to tell stories, but it's not what comic books are.
And I think that's a testament to the creators we've brought on, because we have, I think, maybe with the exception of the couple of guys, most of the creators we've had on have never done superhero books. I mean, Greg Schoen, his book was an all ages, and Andrew and Andre's book was a historical fiction book about the real life Tokyo Rose. And Philip has dabbled in superhero books, but has mostly done his own original ideas, and same with Jonas.
Yeah. And when I had Andrew Schumacher on a couple of weeks ago, like he's doing like a web comic that's sort of an autobiographical web comic about his his struggles growing up, and then he's doing sort of like a political satire with Monkey. So like, he's doing different things, and it's not Batman, standing on a gargoyle just sort of with like rain coming down on him. He's telling a story, he's writing it out, and he's doing it through this art form. So
yeah, it's like when people say I don't like country music. Well, it's just because you've not heard the country music that you like, right? Or it's an art form. You can't just sort of disregard a whole art form just because you don't like superheroes, is basically the thing. Because my wife is a testament to that. That's sort of what she thought originally, and then discovered that there's this unlimited potential for storytelling within the medium.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays we're sort of seeing that in culture with things like hit TV shows and movies that aren't superhero based but are based on graphic novels or comics. It's just great to see, and hopefully this podcast might introduce some people to that as well.
Yeah. All right, so I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I think that discussion was pretty good, and I think we got across our points on what we want to do. So I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode 50. Anybody who wants to give us a follow, we're on Twitter. We're on Twitter as @ConstructCompod. We're on Instagram @ConstructingComicsPod, and we're on Facebook. We have a YouTube channel under the same name of Constructing Comics, and we'll put this up where again, this was another visually heavy episode with slides. So check us out there, and if you could give us a rating or review so other people could find this, we'd really appreciate it. And we'll be back really soon. And as this is episode 50 and we talked about our love of comics, I'd like to encourage everybody to go out there and make some comics and put some art and story out into the world.
And do you want to tell them what's coming up interview-wise? What we got lined up?
Yeah, we have a couple of interviews lined up. We're going to interview, let's see here. We're going to interview Greg Malone, who's got a book coming to Kickstarter soon. And let's see. I'm trying to pull up my schedule here. Oh, actually,
social media. We have updates on that stuff all the time.
Yeah. So I actually just remembered. I'm going to have my buddy Devon Sanders on pretty soon, and he is the marketing director for SPX, which
awesome.
is Expo, and tying into the theme of using comics to tell a story. That's what all SPX is all about. So those
Yeah,
episodes are going to be coming
not
up.
a superhero book between them at that convention.
No. All right.
Yeah.
So Noah, before we sign off, I just want to thank you for being my partner for these first 50 episodes, and I feel like we've done some good stuff, and hopefully we continue to improve and get better. And here's to the next 50 when we hit 100, and we meet more people and we tell more stories of making comics.